And we're progressively building a society where we pathologize anybody who's not, straight up for the cladding by the time they're 2 or 3 years old. But that is, in my opinion, a huge ignorance of the process, of the natural process of how human beings mature from their my world into the external world, into the world of mind, and then, if necessary and where necessary, that world of cladding and ego. So let's talk about the external world. A dialogue, an interplay, and a transition, but a progressive separateness. When we take this one-size-fits-all idea of normality and impose it on every possible human child, then we get this crazed desperation to make sure that everyone's developing at exactly the same pace, and and we want it to be escalated, and we want it to be the best. But according to what? According to the ego world, the world of cladding? I mean, that's a later world. It's just one of many worlds that we transition through, and it's not always necessary. And sometimes it's really, it's very damaging. We have a lot of mental health issues that come from the fact that that world has been incredibly damaging to people, and that's worth acknowledging too. And we're progressively getting more and more of those in very young children. Okay, so the external world is a place of sensory experiences. We experience it through our bodies and our brains as sensations, thoughts, emotions, connections. It's a hands-on world. Let me say that again, it's a hands-on world where sensing and beingness are still relatively strongly intact. So if we make it all about look, listen, learn, we're not allowing people to go from the beingness into the doing through their bodies and learning through their bodies. That connection between body and mind. Think about how many people you've ever hugged and how many of them have actually been in their body. How many will feel their world, physically feel their world. They'll look, they'll listen, but will they touch anything? Will they really get into that, or are they tentative and very unsure and unable to really experience that world through their bodies, or they've left that behind, or they've been taught don't touch, don't touch, don't touch, don't touch. But we need to make it possible that children who are in that stage are able to make that transition from merging with things that they are resonating with in body, moving into a hands-on experience through body and through all the senses, before they get to this place of look, listen, mind. And otherwise we extinguish some of the real depth of connection with the external world and with others, and with that, I think is some of that place of empathy where we feel it in our bodies, and we shouldn't extinguish that, and definitely not extinguish it too early in creating what perhaps can look like a zombie world.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next world is the world of interpreting. It's the interpretive world. It's a world of applied meaning to incoming experiences. And this progressively builds up these mental structures, these frameworks, and ultimately these filter the direct sensed experiences of the physical world. And it's through this that we develop conscious mind as our guide. So we look at something, and for me, I might look at this, and I might say, I might experience it as having a certain voice, which is that sound. I'll experience it as having a certain movement or capacity to create sensations. I might find that it catches light in a certain way. So I can explore it as a sensory collection And perhaps I want to take dust off something, and perhaps I find that, it does that. But I don't necessarily block out everything else it could be by seeing brush. But once I am taught that it is a brush and only brush, what are you doing? What are you doing? It's a brush. Put it down, it's a brush. That's not your brush, whatever. It's a brush, it's for painting, okay? Then we close out all the other ways that we can see and experience something. And it doesn't matter whether it's a brush or whether it's a room or whether it's the cat or whether it's, your partner or whether it's the sky or whatever it is. When we box it and we set it in stone, we reduce the range of ways we can experience it. So when I look at a sky, for example, I feel I can expand. My body feels like it can expand up into that space, or my beingness can expand up into that space. When I experience the sky, I experience it as something that's covering me, and it's full of, it's got twinkles and bits of light, and it's like a cover over the earth. When I experience the sky, it's a moving through, which is so very different to, things that are like directly on the ground, So if we just say, oh, that's the sky, we kind of box all that stuff up. If we say, that's your cat. Well, is it my cat? Because I experienced cat as a fush, 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 something that was pattable and velvety, fush. And it was the same experience as hair, which I don't have. Velvet, fur. I experienced cat as brrrk, which meant fur moving fast on legs. And so if we go, oh yeah, that's the cat, do we capture that? I experience this creature that gets called the cat as another person, as an entity that is capable of language in interaction with me. And the cat shows me what it needs and what it feels, and sometimes it's on my terms, sometimes on cat's terms. My cat, is it my cat? Does the cat belong to itself? Do we have a belonging with or a belonging to? So we get all this boxed thing that starts to dictate a one-size-fits-all or a much more constricted version of everything we see and experience. And I guess this allows us to get this conscious mind so that when people ask us a question, we've got stored stuff and we can come out with it. We can retrieve it and we like that because the person's not coming from unknown knowing. They're not letting out stuff that's unfiltered, that's uncensored. And so we find it a tidier world, a world that is less autistic. It's more managed. It's more acceptable. It's more sculpted, perhaps. And this conscious mind, because it's a reduced thing compared to the vastness of the pre-conscious state. So what happens is that we now have these structures. Information has got to get through the conscious mind, and it filters out a lot of stuff that it sees as relevant or which does not compute. Let's say it is transgender and you have an idea of male, female. Okay, this does not compute. So, and we have a lot of stuff like that where people cannot expand their thinking. They cannot really take in the vast diversity of perspectives and experiences, and they can't see them as different but equal. because they've got this boxed mindedness that says this is how it is. And yet, reality is far vaster. And so this mind thing also creates division between us. And it gets further divided as we move into the ego world and inherited culture and indoctrination and so forth. The interpretive world is perhaps useful. It's useful because it gives us a shorthand of communicating, shared languages, literal logical state. And it also filters information, so we're not overloading all the time. We're not having meltdowns and looking autistic. So people like that. They find that tidy, and they find it less dysfunctional. They find it less less of a pathology. And you have to ask yourself, well, who makes these? Who makes these ideas? Where is this decision of what's normal, what's whatever coming from? And where it's coming from is the next world. So once you have enough learning and language, receptive language, expressive language, be that through typing, be that through speaking, whatever it is that you're using to do that interpretive conscious mind of meaning, boxness, whatever, then you have this extra cladding, which is the ego world. But it's more than just ego, as in, a basic sense of I. The ego contortion it further clads and it alters and it filters the logical meaning that we get from experiences of the physical world. So it alters what mind would logically make of a situation or an experience. And by doing this, it further buries all of that original capacity for sensing and for beingness. So our original, really connected, quite core self is so buried under these layers. We haven't seen it for a long time. And when it comes out slightly, what we have is people correcting because they're living by mind. But now they're correcting in terms of ego and culture, indoctrination, economics, identifications, rewards, honed addictions, competition for social and economic and cultural currency. Oh, don't do that. People will think this. Don't do that. Everyone will respond to you like that. Only this type of person would do this. You want to be popular, don't you? You want to fit in. Don't you want what everybody else would want? But we're all different. We're rebelling. Well, sure, we're all rebelling in the same kind of way. We're all buying our conformist nonconformity from the same shop, so to speak. This ego world is part of where we get, for example, politics, and people who are running the countries are coming from different ego packages that this group of people subscribe to or this group of people subscribe to. And yet these leaders are meant to represent on behalf of all people. But we don't choose them on the basis of even having any understanding of what that ego world is, so that they therefore have some objectivity outside of their cladding subjectivity. We don't choose them for that. We choose them for did we think that they were attractive enough in terms of these standards? Did they say all the right things in terms of this? Did they make us laugh? Did they dot the I's and cross the T's on a certain little cultural package thing that people found themselves indoctrinated into, identifying with, and therefore invested in. But I think that if we're going to choose leaders, we should actually choose leaders who are aware of what these different stages are, and that the cladding actually removes them from the clarity of mind. That the constant reliance on just logic and mind and meaning removes them from the capacity to actually directly and without judgment sensorily experience and take in and empathize within that external world. And that if they're living in this world of cladding, where they're not really even there. They are so far removed from their original place, their original beingness, their capacity to sense, their capacity to understand self in others and others in self, their capacity to know something as what it is, without the impositions of defining, without the impositions of judging or contorting or, measuring. And these are the people that we should have representing vast swathes of people, or representing countries within what should be a whole and united world of living things and the non-living things that they interact with, whether that's the trees, whether that's the environment, whether that's the weather, whether that's animals, whether that's fellow human beings. But because, people are indoctrinated into this idea that the ego world is somehow natural and somehow absolutely necessary and somehow, a higher state, then we don't look at it that way. We have people who are working with minds, in schools, and instead of appreciating and respecting the hands-on and sensory beingness world that is natural to children, they're very fast in trying to get them straight up into mind, meaning, think, look, listen, learn, because they're on their way to ensuring that they have a secure place within the ego world. And I think that teachers need to nurture the wholeness of the human being and encourage them not to forget and not to undervalue and not leave by the roadside that essential core self that they came from. In that world of cladding, it's so overwhelming. You should be this, you should be that, you shouldn't be this, you should be that, until people have a face for everything and everything for a face. Or they have a one-size-fits-all and they're not even in there. So sometimes you see moments of them being in there. Sometimes you'll see some people who have managed to retain themselves as a cohesive human being, who have that core self within there. And it's a really wonderful thing to connect with. But you have a lot of you have people who are coming from that, and they knock up against someone who is just living in mind, has lost all of that beingness. Or you have the person who's just living in the logical mind, interpreting, who is constantly knocking up against the world of the ego-clad people who just see this as aspi.
Citizens don't take psychedelics because it's illegal. Neither do marionettes. Neither do robots. None of these well-behaved and mechanistic reductionist images of humanity take psychedelics. because it's misbehaving. Misbehaving is a great sin. In fact, it's enshrined as the first sin. You'll regard that the psychedelic issue was there in Eden, and somebody misbehaved, and then they got tossed out forever, and their children's children into the chaos of history. It's interesting to read in Genesis why this was. It was because they will become as we are, says Yahweh. They will become as we are if they eat of the fruit of the tree of knowledge. I suggest to you that this is precisely what we should seek to do. We empower our experience by insisting on our authenticity. It's a wonderful thing to learn to be able to stand up and yell bullshit, because so much is being slung and nobody is talking about the primacy of experience and the dignity of the individual. The dignity of the individual. We went a long way with this in America before we betrayed it. And it wasn't only betrayed by the clowns in Washington. It's also betrayed by anybody who clusters themselves around the feet of some self-proclaimed nabob. Because the fact of the matter is, nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it. And so to pretend that one human being will lead another out of the dark night of ignorance and into the shining light of truth is ludicrous, absolutely grotesque, a product of this empowering of the human image that has gone on through several thousand years of dominator culture. If you want a teacher, try a waterfall, or a mushroom, or a mountain wilderness, or a storm-pounded seashore. This is where the action is. It's not back in the hive. It's not in the anthill. It's not knocking your head against the floor in front of somebody who claims that because of their lineage and whose feet they washed and whose feet they washed, that you should give credence to them. Knowledge is provisional, and we are yet to approach even the first moment of civilized understanding. The way it is to be done is by trusting yourself, trusting your intuition. Reject authority. Authority is a lie and an abomination. Authority will lead you into ruin. It's not real. And it isn't, don't get the idea that it's this liberal rap about how everybody has a piece of the action. You know, the Jews know something, the Buddhists know something, the Huichol know something. Nonsense. Rubbish. Nobody knows anything. These are different kinds of shell games that have been worked out by priestly castes of people to keep things under control. Institutions seek to maximize control, control, control. That's what they're into. Did you think they were in the business of enlightening you? Saving your soul? Forget it. Control is what this is all about. And to the degree that we commit ourselves to ideology, we are poisoned. Any ideology, Marxism, Catholicism, objectivism, you name it, rubbish, all rubbish. What is real is experience. What is real is this moment. And so then what it becomes about is, what are the frontiers of experience? How much of that has been taken away from us by these dominators, by these priesthoods, by these cults, by these philosophical shell games? Well, a lot. That's the whole story of history. Our growing unease, our growing dis-ease, our malaise is all about the fact that we are kept from the wellspring of experience.
And I just think that if we have better awareness of these systems, and that it's a process, and that once we get to that stage of cladding, we don't have to fully by it. We don't have to fully identify with it or be fully and forever indoctrinated into it. We can question it. We can question our place within it. We are flexible human beings. We have the capacity to actually make our own lives. We have our capacity to close off, to close out, to look back, to look in, to return, to regain, to reconnect. As long as we have some sense, some map of what that actually means. And it's hard to remember and value that map when it's been so denigrated, so judged, so cast aside, made so redundant and associated with disability or associated with pathology. So my hope is that the world will become less zombied and more present and more diverse and more aware of and embracing of that diversity.